New York City, known for its towering skyscrapers, diverse culture, and relentless pace, begins the day like any other, with millions of people commuting to work, tourists flocking to landmarks, and street vendors selling their goods. The city's vibrancy masks the undercurrent of unease as local news outlets start to report on a peculiar illness spreading in isolated neighborhoods. Initially dismissed as a severe flu, the illness quickly escalates, with victims exhibiting erratic behavior and violent tendencies. The first hints of an impending catastrophe are barely noticed amid the city's constant hum, as the first responders treat the incidents as isolated cases of delirium or drug-induced violence. The outbreak in New York City begins innocuously enough. A tourist returning from a trip abroad unknowingly carries a mutated virus. This individual, showing no symptoms initially, boards a crowded subway train heading towards Times Square station during the morning rush hour. Suddenly, in a fit of uncontrollable aggression, they attack fellow passengers, biting and clawing in a frenzied attempt to satisfy an inexplicable craving. Chaos erupts as screams pierce the air, and the virus spreads rapidly among commuters trapped in the confined space of the subway car. Times Square station, usually bustling with tourists and commuters, descends into pandemonium as the infected rampage through crowds of unsuspecting New Yorkers. The scene is surreal and terrifying, a clash of humanity and horror amidst the flashing billboards and neon lights. Nearby stations like Grand Central Terminal, Union Square, and Penn Station quickly follow suit, each becoming a hotspot of violence and infection as the virus spreads through the bustling transit arteries of the city. Hospitals such as Bellevue Hospital Center and New York Presbyterian Hospital, renowned for their emergency response capabilities, are quickly overwhelmed by a deluge of patients exhibiting severe symptoms, fever, delirium, and a relentless hunger for human flesh. The situation worsens as reports flood in from across the boroughs. Brooklyn's Barclays Center transforms into a makeshift triage center, while the Bronx's Lincoln Medical Center struggles to keep up with the surge of critically ill patients. Initially caught off guard by the rapid escalation of the crisis, city officials underestimate the virus's ability to spread. As hospitals reach capacity and emergency services are stretched to their limits, authorities pivot to a more aggressive stance. Martial law is declared, imposing strict curfews and restricting movement across boroughs. National Guard units are mobilized to secure critical infrastructure and maintain order, their presence intended to reassure residents, but instead contributing to a sense of impending doom. The mayor and governor address the city in somber, televised addresses. Evacuation orders are issued for vulnerable neighborhoods, but the logistics prove daunting as panicked residents clog highways and city streets in desperate attempts to escape. As reports of the mysterious illness begin to filter through the city, New York's media outlets initially struggle to grasp the severity of the situation. At first, snippets of news on local channels and social media platforms paint the outbreaks as isolated incidents of violence or bizarre behavior. However, as the scale of the epidemic becomes apparent, sensationalist headlines dominate the airwaves. News anchors, once calm and composed, now convey a sense of urgency and fear, amplifying the public's growing unease. Images of chaotic scenes at Times Square and subway stations loop endlessly, fueling panic among viewers who see the infection spreading before their eyes. Misinformation spreads like wildfire, further complicating efforts to inform and reassure the public. Manhattan streets, typically alive with commerce and activity, devolve into scenes of horror and desperation. Fifth Avenue becomes a battleground where the infected clash with law enforcement and terrified civilians alike. Wall Street, the financial heart of the city, is overrun as frantic traders and bankers face off against a new kind of threat, one that knows no reason or negotiation. Efforts to contain the outbreak through quarantines and martial law prove futile. Infected neighborhoods like Harlem and Chinatown resist isolation as the virus spreads unabated through densely populated areas. Streets once filled with the vibrant sounds of community life now echo with screams and gunfire as survivors struggle to defend their homes and loved ones. The city's leadership, facing an unprecedented crisis, imposes strict curfews and deploys military units to key locations, but these measures only delay the inevitable. As the infection spreads beyond Manhattan's borders into Queens and Staten Island, the city's vital lifelines, the George Washington Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, and the Lincoln Tunnel, become choked with traffic. Fleeing residents abandon their vehicles in a desperate bid to escape the encroaching horde, further complicating evacuation and containment efforts. New York City, once a beacon of culture and opportunity, now stands on the brink of collapse, its resilience tested as never before by an enemy that strikes from within. As the chaos escalates and the zombie horde spreads unabated throughout New York City, the military is called in to reinforce overwhelmed law enforcement and emergency services. Initially, convoys of National Guard troops roll into the city, armored vehicles and soldiers armed with rifles deployed to strategic points such as bridges, tunnels, and key intersections. Their mission: to establish safe zones, maintain order, and support evacuation efforts. By the way, we have the goal of reaching 1K subs before September. Subscribe and join the best zombie community. Despite their training and equipment, the military soon finds itself outmatched by the relentless onslaught of the undead. At critical choke points like the George Washington Bridge and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, initial skirmishes with small groups of zombies quickly escalate into full-scale battles. The sheer numbers of infected overwhelm the soldiers' defensive positions, their bodies piling up against hastily erected barriers that prove inadequate against the tide of ravenous attackers. Attempts to fortify positions using sandbags and razor wire are futile as the infected swarm relentlessly relentlessly, driven by an insatiable hunger that ignores pain and fear. Despite initial successes in securing smaller areas, such as Central Park or the grounds around iconic landmarks like the Empire State Building, the military is unable to hold these positions indefinitely. The infected breach defenses through sheer force of numbers or unexpected mutations in their behavior, catching soldiers off guard and overwhelming their perimeter. Landmarks once considered bastions of safety become grim battlegrounds, where soldiers and survivors alike fight desperately to hold on before being overrun. The fall of these key positions deals a demoralizing blow to military morale and civilian hope, signaling the city's inexorable slide into chaos. Faced with mounting casualties and dwindling supplies, military commanders are forced to make difficult decisions. Strategic withdrawals are ordered, leaving behind equipment and wounded soldiers as they pull back to regroup at secondary defensive lines. Evacuation efforts become increasingly chaotic as military convoys clash with panicked civilians on gridlocked streets. In the absence of effective leadership and clear evacuation plans, fear and desperation rule the day, with some units abandoning their posts entirely to join the exodus of fleeing residents, thus leading to the inevitable fall of New York City against the zombies. Thanks for watching.